My name is Mallory. I am 28 years old, and I will never forget the moment I watched my father hurl my Christmas gifts into the snow while my stepmother Brenda stood behind him with that satisfied smirk plastered across her face. The boxes burst open on impact, scattering tissue paper and ribbons across the icy driveway of the house he thought belonged to him. What he didn't know, what none of them knew as they slammed the door in my face, was that I held the deed to that property in my purse, and the 4-year waiting period my grandmother had stipulated in her will had expired 3 months ago. He had no clue that the truth folded in my coat pocket would change everything. Before we dive into how I got here, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, go ahead and hit that like button because this story is for you. Make sure to subscribe because you will want to hear how this all plays out, and trust me, what happens next will leave you stunned. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare really started. My mother Dorothy died when I was 8 years old. It happened on a winter evening, much like the one when my father threw my gifts away, black ice on a curved road and a driver who never saw her coming. The grief swallowed our small family whole. But it swallowed me differently than it did my father Russell. Within 18 months of losing my mother, Dad married Brenda, a widow with a 12-year-old son named Trevor. I thought maybe we would heal together, that Brenda and Trevor would help fill the emptiness Mom left behind. Instead, I became a ghost in my own home. Trevor was everything I was not. He was loud where I was quiet, confident where I was uncertain, and from the moment Brenda moved into our house, he became the sun around which my father orbited. The shift happened so gradually I almost didn't notice it at first. Dad started missing my school events because Trevor had practices or games. When I was 13, I won the regional spelling bee after months of studying every night, but Dad missed the ceremony entirely because Trevor had a soccer tournament 3 hours away. I stood on that stage holding my trophy, scanning the audience for his face, finding only my grandmother Constance sitting alone in the 3rd row with tears in her eyes. She clapped louder than anyone else, but it could not fill the dad-shaped hole in that auditorium. The inequalities became impossible to ignore as we grew older. Trevor attended an expensive private school, while I went to the overcrowded public high school across town. When Trevor turned 16, Dad bought him a brand new sedan with heated seats and a premium sound system. When I turned 16, I worked weekend shifts at a grocery store for 8 months to save enough money for a beat-up Honda with a cracked windshield and a passenger door that only opened from the outside. Dad said it built character, that I needed to learn the value of hard work. Meanwhile, Trevor's college tuition was paid in full, his apartment deposit covered, his spring break trips funded without question. I took out student loans to attend community college and worked 2 jobs to cover my books and rent for a studio apartment with water stains on the ceiling. The worst part was not the money, though that stung deeply enough. The worst part was the message underneath all of it, the unspoken truth that wrapped around my lungs and squeezed a little tighter each year. You are not worth the investment. You do not matter as much. You are the backup child. The spare, the one we keep around out of obligation rather than love. When I was 16, I ended up in the emergency room with severe abdominal pain, terrified it might be my appendix. Dad complained the entire drive to the hospital about missing Trevor's debate tournament, checked his watch every 5 minutes while we waited for test results, and left me with a nurse while he took a phone call in the parking lot. It turned out to be a stomach virus, nothing serious. But I never forgot the relief on his face when the doctor said I could go home. Not relief that I was okay, but relief that he had not missed too much of Trevor's event. My grandmother Constance noticed everything. She lived alone in a comfortable 3-bedroom house in a desirable suburb about 30 minutes from where we lived, a house she had purchased back in the 1960s when the neighborhood was just being developed. Over the years, as the area grew and property values skyrocketed, that modest house became worth a substantial amount of money. After Mom died and Dad remarried, Constance became my sanctuary. I spent weekends at her house throughout my teenage years, helping her tend her garden, listening to her stories about my mother's childhood, learning how she had managed her finances as a single woman in an era when banks barely wanted to give women credit cards. She taught me about property value, about building equity, about the importance of owning something that no one could take away from you. More than that, she saw me. She asked about my spelling bee and actually showed up. She remembered my favorite foods and kept them stocked in her kitchen. She told me I mattered, over and over, until I almost started to believe it. Constance passed away when I was 24 years old. She went peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday night in early February, and I found her the next morning when she did not answer my usual Wednesday breakfast call. The funeral was small, and I cried harder than I thought possible, mourning not just my grandmother, but the loss of the only person who had made me feel truly loved after my mother died. Dad seemed sad at the service, but he perked up noticeably when Constance's attorney Harold Pemberton announced there would be a will reading the following week. I sat in Harold's office the next Tuesday, sandwiched between Dad and Brenda, while Trevor lounged in a chair by the window looking bored. Harold cleared his throat and began reading the will in that formal, measured tone attorneys use for such occasions. Dad leaned forward when Harold reached the section about the house, clearly expecting to hear his name. Instead, Harold read, "I leave my house at 428 Maple Drive, along with all property, contents, and associated assets, to my beloved granddaughter, Mallory Christine Bennett." The silence in that office was deafening. Dad's mouth fell open. Brenda made a small, choking sound. Trevor sat up straight for the first time all afternoon. Before anyone could speak, Harold continued. "However, there are specific conditions attached to this bequest." He explained that while I was the legal owner effective immediately, there was a 4-year testing period during which my ownership must remain confidential. If Dad requested to live in the house during this time, he would be permitted to do so rent-free, with all decisions about modifications and renovations going through the trust attorney for approval, though Dad would not know I was the one approving them. After 4 years, I would gain full control and decision-making authority, with the option to disclose my ownership or continue the arrangement as I saw fit. Harold asked Dad and Brenda to step out while he spoke to me privately. Once they left, he handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Constance's elegant handwriting. Inside was a letter that explained everything. She wrote that she had watched Dad favor Trevor over me for years, had seen how I was treated as an afterthought in my own family. She wanted to give me security and independence, but she also wanted to test whether Dad's feelings for me could exist separate from what I owned. If he learned to value me without knowing about my inheritance, then I would know his love was genuine. If he continued to treat me as lesser, well, then I would have the power to make my own choices about our relationship from a position of strength rather than desperate need for his approval. Harold told me that Dad had already approached him about living in Constance's house. Dad's small construction company had hit financial difficulties about 3 years earlier when a major contract fell through, and things had gotten worse when Brenda needed surgery for a herniated disc, leaving them with substantial medical bills despite their insurance. They had been renting a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, and the chance to live rent-free in Constance's spacious home seemed like a gift from heaven to them. Harold, following Constance's instructions, told Dad the house was held in trust and that he could live there without charge for 4 years while the estate was being settled. Dad never asked what would happen after 4 years. He never asked if I had inherited anything. He never even asked me how I felt about losing Grandma Constance or whether I needed any support during my grief. He just moved his family into my house and started treating it like his own. I watched from a distance as they settled in. Brenda immediately began redecorating, erasing Constance's carefully curated vintage aesthetic and replacing it with her own preference for contemporary minimalism. The floral wallpaper my grandmother had chosen in the dining room came down. The antique mirrors in the hallway were replaced with modern pieces from a big box store. Dad renovated the kitchen, tearing out the original cabinets Constance had lovingly maintained and installing sleek new ones in a color Brenda called greige. Every change had to be submitted to Harold, who then consulted with me. I approved almost everything, thinking maybe if Dad felt comfortable in the space, he might eventually invite me to be part of it. Maybe he would ask me to Sunday dinners. Maybe he would suggest I take one of the spare bedrooms when my lease was up. Maybe he would finally see me as his daughter rather than an obligation. He never did. 4 years passed, and I remained in my small studio apartment, working 2 jobs, paying off my student loans bit by bit. Dad never offered me a room. He never invited me for holidays. Trevor got the largest bedroom when he visited, the one with the attached bathroom and the walk-in closet. I knew because I drove by sometimes, late at night, and saw the lights on in what had been my grandmother's sewing room, the space where she and I used to sit together while she taught me to embroider dish towels with flowers and birds. Now it housed Trevor's gaming setup and his collection of athletic trophies. My grandmother's memory had been scrubbed from her own house, and the granddaughter she had loved enough to give it to was not even welcome to visit. 6 months before that terrible Christmas Eve, I gathered enough courage to ask Dad if I could join the family for Thanksgiving dinner. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon during my lunch break, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding distracted, and I could hear Brenda talking in the background about grocery lists. I asked if there might be room for me at the table that year, explaining that I did not have anywhere else to go and would love to spend the holiday with family. There was a long pause. Then Dad said Brenda had already planned for a specific number of people and it might be awkward to add another. I offered to bring dishes, insisted I just wanted some family time, promised I would not be any trouble. He reluctantly agreed, though he made it abundantly clear I was squeezing in rather than being genuinely welcomed. I showed up on Thanksgiving with a homemade pumpkin pie that had taken me 3 hours to perfect and a green bean casserole made from a recipe I found online. I had used my grocery store employee discount to buy the ingredients, carefully selecting everything to make sure it would be good enough. When I rang the doorbell, Brenda answered wearing an apron that said "Thankful" in cursive script, and her smile faltered when she saw me. She took my dishes without comment and directed me toward the dining room, where I found the table beautifully set with Constance's good china, the set my grandmother had promised would be mine someday. There were name cards at each place setting in Brenda's careful calligraphy. I searched for mine and found it at the corner of the table, a folding chair squeezed in at an awkward angle, a mismatched plate from a different set, a paper napkin while everyone else had cloth. Trevor arrived 20 minutes later with his new girlfriend Amber, a blonde woman with perfect teeth who worked in pharmaceutical sales. They were given the seats of honor across from Dad and Brenda, and I watched as everyone fawned over Amber, asking her about her job and her family and her opinions on everything from football to politics. Throughout dinner, Dad bragged extensively about Trevor's new sales position, emphasizing that Trevor was making $30 per hour plus commission, that he had already earned 2 bonuses, that his boss had called him a natural. Dad explained how he had helped Trevor with the deposit for his new apartment, a spacious 2-bedroom in a complex with a pool and a fitness center. He described Trevor's company car, his benefits package, his promising career trajectory. When there was a brief lull in the Trevor Appreciation Fest, I mentioned that I had just been promoted to assistant manager at the retail store where I worked, a position I had worked extremely hard to earn. Dad glanced at me briefly, said, "That's nice, honey," in that absent tone people use when they are not really listening, and immediately turned the conversation back to Trevor's accomplishments. Brenda chimed in with a story about how Trevor had always been ambitious, even as a child, how he had run a lemonade stand at age 7 and made $40 in a single weekend. The comparison was unspoken but deafening. Trevor was destined for greatness. I was destined to manage a retail store in a strip mall. After dinner, as Brenda served coffee and slices of a store-bought pecan pie, ignoring the pumpkin pie I had brought entirely, Dad made an announcement. He and Brenda had decided to give Trevor an early Christmas present, a gift to help him and Amber take a trip to Europe next spring. He handed Trevor an envelope, and when Trevor opened it and pulled out a check, his eyes went wide. $3,000. My heart plummeted into my stomach. $3,000 for a vacation while I was eating ramen noodles 4 nights a week and walking to work because my car needed new tires I could not afford. Brenda made a pointed comment, her voice dripping with false sweetness, about how they liked to help their children who made something of themselves, who showed real ambition and drive. Trevor smirked in my direction and added, "Yeah, not everyone has what it takes, you know." Everyone laughed except me. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and let the tears come silently while I pressed a towel against my mouth to muffle any sound. From the hallway, I could hear Dad talking to Amber, his voice warm and engaged in a way it never was with me. He was telling her that I had always been their sensitive one, that I never had quite the drive or ambition of Trevor, that they worried about me but hoped I would eventually find my way. He said it so casually, so matter-of-factly, as if my entire existence could be summed up as a disappointment they tolerated. I stayed in that bathroom for 15 minutes, waiting for my eyes to look less red, waiting for the tightness in my chest to ease enough that I could breathe normally. When I emerged, I found Brenda in the kitchen wrapping up leftovers. I offered to help, desperate for any scrap of inclusion, but she waved me off and said she had a system. I returned to the dining room to find everyone had moved to the living room to watch football. There was no space for me on the couch, and no one moved to make room. I stood in the doorway for a moment, invisible, then quietly gathered my empty casserole dish and pie pan. I told Dad I was leaving, thanked him for having me. He looked up from the game just long enough to say, "Drive safe," before his attention returned to the television. I walked out through the front door of my own house, got into my beat-up Honda, and cried the entire drive back to my studio apartment. The worst part was not what had happened, but the realization that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. Dad was never going to change. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I achieved, I would always be the afterthought daughter, the one who did not quite measure up. My birthday fell on the 8th of December, right in the middle of the holiday season when everyone seemed too busy to remember anyone else existed. I turned 28 that year, a number that felt simultaneously too old and too young, old enough to know better than to expect anything from my family, young enough to still hope they might surprise me. The day started like most others, with my alarm going off at 6 in the morning so I could get ready for my shift at the store. I checked my phone hopefully, wondering if maybe this year Dad would remember to call me, maybe send a card, maybe acknowledge the day in some small way. Nothing. I worked through my morning shift, rang up customers buying early Christmas gifts, helped an elderly woman find the right size sweater for her granddaughter, reset displays that had been picked through overnight. At noon, I took my lunch break in the back room and checked my phone again. Still nothing. I ate my packed sandwich, scrolled through social media, and saw that several acquaintances from high school had posted birthday wishes on my timeline. Their kindness made me smile, but it also highlighted the silence from the people who should have mattered most. I finished my shift at 4, drove home through rush-hour traffic, and spent the evening alone in my apartment, eating takeout Chinese food and watching holiday movies on a streaming service. At 9 p.m., my phone finally buzzed with a text from Dad. The message was brief, almost businesslike. "Happy birthday, kiddo." No call, no elaboration, no invitation to celebrate together. Just those 3 words sent from his phone like an afterthought, like something he remembered at the last minute while scrolling through his calendar. I stared at that message for a long time, trying to decide if I should respond with enthusiasm I did not feel or honesty he did not want to hear. I settled on a simple, "Thanks, Dad," and set my phone down. The next day, scrolling through social media during my morning break, I discovered why Dad had been too busy to remember my birthday properly. Brenda had posted dozens of photos from a surprise party they had thrown for her younger sister Diane. The party had been held at the house, my house, the one Dad thought belonged to him. The photos showed elaborate decorations, a catered spread of food on the dining room table, champagne toasts in the living room, a professional-looking cake with intricate frosting flowers. The party had taken place on December 8th. On my birthday, Dad had been there in every photo, smiling broadly, his arm around Brenda, clearly having a wonderful time celebrating someone else on the day I was born. Trevor was tagged in multiple images, dressed in a nice button-down shirt, holding a champagne flute, laughing at something Diane's husband had said. I sat in the break room staring at those photos, my untouched sandwich growing warm in its plastic wrapper. Dad had not forgotten my birthday. He had known exactly what day it was and had chosen to spend it celebrating someone else. He had been in my house, the house my grandmother gave me, throwing a party for Brenda's family, while his own daughter ate Chinese takeout alone in a studio apartment. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom before my coworkers could see me cry. 2 days later, I called Dad. My hands were shaking, and I had rehearsed what I wanted to say at least 20 times, but I needed to address what had happened. When he answered, I could hear a football game playing in the background. I asked if we could talk, and he said, "Sure, what was up?" his tone suggesting he was only half listening. I took a deep breath and told him as gently as I could that I had felt hurt when he did not acknowledge my birthday properly, especially when I saw he had been at a party that same day. There was a long pause, and then Dad said in an exasperated voice that he had not forgotten. He had texted me. Had I not gotten his message? I said yes, I had gotten it, but that a text at 9 p.m. felt like an afterthought, and it had hurt to see him celebrating someone else on my birthday. His response made my stomach drop. He told me I was being too sensitive, that he had acknowledged my birthday and that should be enough, that I needed to grow up and stop making everything about me. I could hear Brenda's voice in the background, sharp and irritated, saying something I could not quite make out. Dad repeated whatever she said, telling me that some of us have real obligations and busy lives, and that I needed to understand not everything could revolve around my feelings. I tried to explain that I was not asking for everything, just for some indication that I mattered to him, but he cut me off. He said he had to go, they were busy planning Christmas stuff. Before I could respond, I asked if I could come for Christmas, my voice embarrassingly small and desperate. There was another long pause. Long enough that I could hear the announcers on the football game discussing a play. Finally, Dad said he would let me know, that Brenda had family coming and they needed to figure out the logistics. He hung up without saying goodbye. A week before Christmas, I discovered through Facebook that there was no question of logistics. Dad had created an event page for Russell's annual Christmas Eve party and had invited 30 people, including extended family members I barely knew, Trevor's, friends, and various relatives from Brenda's side. I scrolled through the guest list, my heart sinking with each name, finding everyone except me. I was not invited to the Christmas party at my own house. For a moment, I considered the possibility that it was an oversight, that maybe Dad had planned to invite me separately. Then I noticed the event details specifically mentioned intimate gathering, limited space, and I knew it was intentional. I did something I immediately regretted but could not stop myself from doing. I commented on the event post, trying to keep my tone light and casual. "Will there be room for me?" I wrote, adding a smiley face emoji to soften the desperation I felt. I watched the post for the next hour, refreshing the page obsessively. My comment was deleted within 60 minutes, vanished as if it had never existed. Dad never sent me a private message explaining. Brenda never reached out. Trevor never said a word. The message was clear. You are not wanted here. My best friend Iris called me that evening after seeing the whole thing unfold online. Iris had known me since college, had seen me through every disappointment and heartbreak, and she was angrier on my behalf than I could manage to be for myself. She told me I needed to show up to that party with Harold the attorney and the deed to the house, that I needed to stop letting them treat me like I was worthless. I told her I could not do it, that I needed to give Dad one more chance, that maybe if I showed up with gifts and showed him how much I still cared, he would realize what he was doing. Iris said I was setting myself up for more pain, but she also knew me well enough to understand I had to try. I needed to know, once and for all, if my father was capable of choosing me. I started planning. I would buy thoughtful gifts, arrive at the party with a smile, and give Dad one final opportunity to welcome me into his life. If he rejected me again, then I would reveal the truth about who really owned that house. It was my last desperate attempt to salvage a relationship that had been dying slowly for 20 years. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow falling steadily, the kind of picture-perfect winter scene that belonged on greeting cards and in holiday movies. I spent the morning wrapping gifts I had saved for months to afford, each one chosen with painful care. For Dad, I had found a vintage tool set at an estate sale, the exact brand he had mentioned wanting years ago when we still had conversations about things like his work and his hobbies. It had cost me $250, money I desperately needed for other things, but I wanted him to know I had listened, that I remembered. For Brenda, I chose a cashmere scarf in a soft gray color I had seen her admire in a store window when we ran into each other at the mall in October. $80 I could not afford. But I wanted her to like me, to see me as someone worth including. For Trevor, premium wireless headphones in the brand all his friends seemed to own, $120 that meant I would be eating rice and beans for the next 2 weeks. I wrapped each gift carefully, using expensive paper and real ribbon, adding handwritten cards that tried to strike the right balance between loving and not too desperate. I drove through the snow to the house around 7 p.m. when the party invitation said it would be in full swing. The windows glowed warm and golden, and I could see figures moving inside, hear the muted sound of music and laughter. Cars lined the street, people I recognized and people I did not, all gathered to celebrate Christmas Eve at my house, while I sat in my beat-up Honda, trying to gather the courage to walk to the front door. I thought about all the Christmases after Mom died, how Dad used to make hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, how we would watch old movies together on Christmas Eve before he met Brenda. I thought about how desperately I wanted that feeling back, that sense of belonging somewhere, of being somebody's daughter who mattered. I picked up the stack of gifts from my passenger seat and walked through the snow to the front porch. The doorbell rang out loud and clear, and through the frosted glass I saw someone approaching. The door opened, and Brenda stood there in a red cocktail dress, holding a glass of white wine, her face immediately souring when she saw me standing there with my gifts. She did not say hello, did not smile, did not step aside to let me in from the cold. Instead, she asked in a flat, hostile voice what I was doing there. I tried to keep my voice steady, explaining that I had wanted to bring gifts and spend Christmas with family. She looked me up and down as if I had shown up in my pajamas instead of the nice sweater and slacks I had carefully chosen. Then she said, her words clipped and clear so there would be no misunderstanding, that this was a private party and I could not just show up uninvited. I felt something crack inside my chest, but I pushed forward. I told her this was my father's house and I was his daughter, surely there was room for me. Brenda's eyes went cold, and she said that if Dad had wanted me there, he would have invited me. I stood on the porch of my own house, snow falling on my shoulders, being told by my stepmother that I was not welcome. Before I could respond, Dad appeared behind her, his face flushed from drinks and warmth, his expression shifting from confusion to discomfort when he saw me standing there. He asked what was going on, and I held out my gifts toward him, my hands shaking. I told him I had brought presents, that I wanted to celebrate Christmas with him. He glanced back into the house, where I could see guests mingling, hear someone laughing at a joke, smell something delicious cooking in the kitchen. Brenda said loudly, her voice carrying into the house, that Russell's guests were waiting for him. Dad looked at me, looked at the gifts, looked back at the party, and I saw him make his choice in real time. He told me this was not a good time, that they had not planned for extra people, that I should have coordinated with him beforehand. The excuse was paper thin, an obvious lie, and we both knew it. I felt tears starting to build behind my eyes, and I fought them back because I did not want to give Brenda the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I told Dad, my voice breaking despite my best efforts, that I just wanted to spend Christmas with my father. He shifted uncomfortably, and for a moment I thought maybe he would relent. Maybe he would remember who I was and invite me inside. Then Trevor appeared behind Dad, that familiar smirk on his face, and said in a mocking tone that this was classic Mallory, always needing attention, always making everything about her drama. Something inside me snapped. I said, louder than I intended, that I just wanted to be included in my own family, that I was not asking for anything unreasonable. Dad's face hardened in a way I had seen before, usually directed at contractors who messed up his jobs or telemarketers who called during dinner. He told me I always did this, always made scenes, always turned things into situations. I asked what I was doing, how wanting to see my father on Christmas was making a scene. He said I was making everything about me, that they had guests, that this was inappropriate and manipulative. I stood there with my gifts, snow soaking through my shoes, and I begged. I am not proud of it, but I begged my father to let me into the house my grandmother had given me. I said please, told him it was Christmas, reminded him I had nowhere else to go. He looked at me with something that might have been pity or might have been disgust, I could not tell which. Then he did something I will remember for the rest of my life. He reached out and took the gifts from my hands, all 3 carefully wrapped boxes, and I thought for one shining moment that he was accepting them, that he was going to let me in. Instead, he turned and walked down the porch steps into the snowy driveway. I watched, frozen in disbelief, as my father threw the first gift into the deep snowbank beside the driveway. The box hit with a dull thud and sank partially into the white drift. Then he threw the second gift, and the third, each one landing in the snow and slush. The boxes burst open on impact, the beautiful wrapping paper tearing, ribbons scattered, contents spilling out into the dirty snow mixed with road salt. The vintage tools I had spent months hunting for lay half buried in ice. The cashmere scarf hung limply from a bare branch. The headphones skidded across frozen ground and came to rest in a puddle of slush. I could see faces in the windows now, guests who had been drawn by the commotion, some looking uncomfortable, others with expressions that suggested they thought I deserved this somehow. Dad walked back toward the porch, brushing snow off his hands, and told me in a voice loud enough for everyone inside to hear that I should not come back here uninvited, that this was his house and his family, and that I needed to respect boundaries. Those words, his house, echoed in my ears. Trevor was laughing openly now, saying something about how maybe this would finally teach me some boundaries. Brenda called from the doorway that Russell should come inside before he caught cold, her concern for him pointed and obvious, her complete lack of concern for me standing there with tears freezing on my face equally clear. Dad walked past me without another word, and the door shut firmly behind him. I heard the lock click into place. I stood alone in the driveway for I do not know how long, staring at my ruined gifts scattered in the snow, watching through the windows as the party continued without pause. No one came out to check on me. No one opened the door to apologize. The Christmas lights Dad had hung along the gutters of my house blinked in cheerful patterns, mocking me with their festive joy. I finally walked back to my car, got inside, and sat there shaking, not from cold but from the complete destruction of any remaining hope I had carried that my father loved me. He had thrown my gifts in the snow. He had told me never to come back to my own house. He had chosen a party full of people over his own daughter on Christmas Eve, and he had done it publicly, humiliatingly, without a shred of remorse. I do not remember driving to Iris' house. I must have, because I found myself sitting in her driveway 20 minutes later, still shaking, mascara running down my face in dark streaks. She must have been watching for me because her front door opened before I could even get out of the car, and she came running out in her slippers, not bothering with a coat. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe, and that was when I completely fell apart. I sobbed in her driveway, in her arms, letting out 20 years of hurt and rejection and desperate hope that had finally, irrevocably died in that snowy driveway. Iris got me inside, wrapped me in blankets, made me tea I did not drink, and let me cry until I had no tears left. Her husband Keith came home an hour later, took one look at the situation, and listened quietly while Iris explained what had happened. Keith was an attorney at a prestigious firm downtown, and he had known about my inheritance since the beginning because Iris told him everything, and I had needed someone else to know I was not completely crazy for keeping this secret so long. When Iris finished explaining about the gifts in the snow and Dad telling me to never come back, Keith's jaw tightened in a way that would have scared me if it had been directed at me instead of at my father. He said 3 words that changed everything. "That's it." Then, He pulled out his phone and started making calls despite it being almost 10 p.m. on Christmas Eve. He called Harold Pemberton, Constance's attorney, who apparently had been waiting for this moment for 4 years. Harold answered on the second ring and said he would have everything ready by morning. Keith explained that we were going to the house tomorrow, Christmas Day, with the deed and all supporting documents. We were going to present Russell with the truth, and then Russell would have a choice. He could acknowledge what he had done, make genuine amends, and we could discuss an arrangement going forward, or he could face a 30-day eviction notice from the house he thought he owned. I sat wrapped in blankets on Iris' couch, listening to Keith make these plans, and I felt paralyzed between relief and terror. Part of me still hoped, even after everything, that Dad would call me before morning, that he would realize what he had done and apologize. That he would text me, ask where I was, make sure I was okay. I checked my phone obsessively throughout the night, watching the screen light up with holiday greetings from acquaintances and coworkers, but nothing from Dad, nothing from Trevor, nothing from anyone who shared my blood. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold. I had not slept, had spent the night on Iris' couch staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the previous evening, every word Dad had said, every gift lying broken in the snow. Iris made coffee and toast I could not eat, and Keith reviewed the legal documents one more time, making sure everything was in order. Harold arrived at 9 a.m. with a leather portfolio containing everything we needed. The original deed with my name clearly visible. Constance's will, certified and notarized. The letter she had written explaining her reasoning. The one that said if Dad could not see my worth after 4 years of living rent-free in my house, then he never would. Documentation showing that every renovation Russell had done, every change Brenda had made, had been approved by me through the trust attorney. Proof that they had been living in my property, improving my asset, while treating me like I was worth less than nothing. Before we left, I reread Constance's letter one more time. Her handwriting was elegant and steady, the penmanship of someone who had grown up before computers and had taken pride in such things. She wrote, "Sweet girl, I give you this house because you deserve security your father never provided. I made him wait 4 years because I wanted to believe he might change, that he might learn to value you without knowing what you owned. If he could not see your worth by the time you read this as the legal owner, then show him what he has lost by his own choices. You owe him nothing but the truth, and the truth is that you are valuable, you are worthy, you are enough, whether he can see it or not. I see it. I always have. This house is yours. But more importantly, your future is yours. Build it well." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in my purse next to the deed. I thought about all the times I had tried to earn Dad's love, all the ways I had twisted myself into smaller and smaller shapes, trying to fit into a space he never intended to make for me. I thought about Constance, sitting in her kitchen teaching me about property values and compound interest, preparing me for this moment, even though I had not known it at the time. I realized she had given me more than a house. She had given me a foundation, a place to stand when everything else fell apart. It was time to use it. We drove to the house in Keith's car, the legal documents secure in Harold's portfolio. As we pulled up, I saw Dad's truck in the driveway, along with Brenda's sedan and Trevor's car. They were all home, probably opening presents, drinking coffee, enjoying their Christmas morning in my house. I felt my hands shaking again, and Iris reached over from the back seat to squeeze my shoulder. She told me I was doing the right thing, that I deserved better than how they had treated me. Keith parked on the street, and we all got out. I pulled Constance's old key from my purse, the one she had given me when I was 16 and started visiting on my own. I had kept it all these years, a small piece of metal that connected me to the one person who had truly seen me. I walked up to the front door, the same door that had been slammed in my face 12 hours earlier, and I used my key to unlock it. I was about to walk into my own house and change everything, and there was no going back from this moment. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, followed by Iris, Keith, and Harold. The confrontation that would finally reveal 20 years of truth was about to begin, and I was as ready as I would ever be. Dad was in the living room sitting in the recliner that had belonged to Constance, the one Brenda had reupholstered in a modern gray fabric that erased every trace of my grandmother's rose pattern. Brenda sat on the couch with her feet tucked under her, and Trevor was sprawling in the other chair with a new tablet in his hands, probably a Christmas gift from Dad. There were torn wrapping paper and ribbons scattered across the floor, coffee mugs on the end tables, the scene of a peaceful family Christmas morning that I had never been invited to be part of. All three of them looked up when I walked in, and I watched their expressions shift from confusion to recognition to anger in the span of seconds. Dad stood up quickly, his face already reddening, and demanded to know what the hell I was doing there. I noticed he did not ask if I was okay, did not acknowledge that he had thrown my gifts in the snow and left me standing in the cold the night before. His only concern was my presence in what he thought was his space. Brenda stood up too, her voice going shrill as she threatened to call the police, said I was trespassing, said I had gone too far this time. I felt my heart pounding, but my voice came out steady and calm in a way that surprised me. I told Brenda to please do call the police, that I would love to explain to them exactly who owned this house. The confusion on their faces would have been funny if the situation were not so devastating. Dad asked what I was talking about, said the house belonged to the family, his voice suggesting he thought I had lost my mind. Trevor laughed from his chair. Said I was delusional, said I really needed professional help. I looked at my father and said clearly, loudly enough that there could be no misunderstanding, that this house did not belong to the family, it belonged to me. I was the sole legal owner, had been for 4 years, and they had been living rent-free in my property while treating me like garbage. Keith stepped forward, introduced himself as an attorney, and said he had documents that proved everything I was saying. He moved to the coffee table, swept aside some of the wrapping paper, and laid out the portfolio. He opened it to reveal the deed with my name typed clearly on the legal description. Russell David Bennett had no claim to 428 Maple Drive. Mallory Christine Bennett was listed as the sole owner, had been since Constance's death 4 years and 10 months ago. Dad picked up the deed with hands that shook slightly, held it close to his face as if he could not believe what he was reading. He kept saying it could not be right, that the attorney had told him the house was in trust, that there must be some mistake. Harold stepped forward then, introduced himself as the estate attorney who had handled Constance's will, and explained that there was no mistake. He told Dad that the trust arrangement had been a temporary condition set by Constance herself. She had wanted to see if Dad would treat me with love and respect without knowing what I owned. The trust gave him 4 years of rent-free living. 4 years to prove that his relationship with his daughter could exist independent of financial considerations or property ownership. Harold's voice was professional, but I could hear the edge of disapproval in it, as he told Dad that Mallory had been the legal owner the entire time he had been living there, that every renovation and change had required her approval through the trust attorney, that she had been extraordinarily generous in allowing him to stay. Brenda snatched the will from the coffee table and read through it, her eyes moving frantically across the page. I watched her face go pale as she found the section that clearly stated Constance left the house, the property, and all associated assets to me. She looked up at me with something that might have been fear or might have been calculation, I could not tell. Trevor had gone very quiet in his chair, the tablet forgotten in his lap, and I realized he was doing math in his head, probably figuring out exactly how much money they had spent on improvements to a house I owned. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. Dad finally sank back into the recliner, still holding the deed, and asked in a voice that sounded smaller than before if this was really true. If I had really owned the house all this time. I confirmed that yes, it was true. For 4 years I had been the owner. 4 years during which he had never invited me to visit, never asked if I needed anything, never treated me like I was part of his family. 4 years of watching him choose Trevor over me again and again while living in the house my grandmother gave me specifically because she had watched him do the same thing. Brenda found her voice then, and it came out sharp and accusing. She said I had been manipulating them, that I had let them live there under false pretenses, that I had been testing them like they were laboratory rats. I felt anger surge up in my chest, hot and fierce. I told her that I had been hoping they would choose to love me without knowing what I owned, that Constance had structured it this way to protect me from exactly what had happened. Iris spoke up then, her voice cutting through the tension, pointing out that if they had treated me with basic human decency, we would not be having this conversation. If they had invited me to holidays, if they had acknowledged my birthday, if they had not thrown my gifts in the snow and told me to never come back, then I might have been content to let them stay indefinitely. Trevor suddenly exploded out of his chair, his face red with rage. He started yelling about how this was manipulation, about how I had been spying on them, about how I had let them spend money renovating my property. He was right about that last part. I had let them spend approximately $15,000 on the kitchen remodel alone, and every dollar they had invested had increased the value of my asset. Keith pointed this out calmly, said that actually they had done me a favor by improving my property, though considering how they had treated me, he did not recommend I thank them for it. Trevor took a step toward me, and Keith immediately moved between us, making it clear that any physical aggression would result in immediate police involvement. Dad finally spoke again, asked what I wanted, what the point of all this was. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw a man who had gotten older without me noticing, who had gray in his hair and lines around his eyes, who looked genuinely confused about why I was upset. I told him I wanted him to be my dad. Actually my dad. Not just when it was convenient or when he thought he might get something from me. I wanted him to care about my life, my job, my struggles and triumphs. I wanted to matter to him the way Trevor mattered, the way Brenda's family mattered, the way everyone else seemed to matter. He was quiet for a long moment, then asked if I would charge them rent if they stayed. That question, that single question, broke something in me that I had not even known was still intact. His first concern was not how to repair our relationship, not how to make amends for the hurt he had caused, but whether this revelation would cost him money. I told him that was his first question, not how can I make this right or what can I do to be a better father, but will this cost me money? He said he was trying to be practical, that we needed to discuss the logistics. I told him I was trying to matter, that I needed a father who saw me as more than an inconvenience or a financial consideration. Brenda tried a different approach then. Her voice suddenly sweet and cajoling. She said maybe they had all gotten off on the wrong foot, that perhaps there had been misunderstandings, that maybe we could start fresh. She suggested I could move in with them since it was such a big house, plenty of room for everyone. Iris made a disgusted sound and said, "Now you invite her to live here, after everything." Brenda ignored her and turned to Dad, told him to back her up, to tell me they wanted me there. Dad looked between Brenda and me, clearly torn, and said nothing. His silence was more damning than any words could have been. I waited, giving him one more chance to say something real, something that indicated he understood the magnitude of what he had done. Instead, he asked again about the practical arrangements, about how long they could stay, about what would happen next. I realized in that moment that Constance had been right. 4 years had not been enough to change him. 20 years had not been enough. He would never choose to see me as valuable unless he was forced to, unless his own comfort and security depended on it. Even now, confronted with proof of my ownership and his own cruelty, he was thinking about logistics rather than love. Trevor stood up abruptly, his face still red, and demanded to know if I understood what I had done by letting them renovate. He started listing off the improvements they had made, the new appliances, the refinished floors, the updated bathrooms. He said they had put $15,000 into the kitchen alone, and now I was going to benefit from all of that work. Keith responded smoothly that yes, they had improved Mallory's property value significantly, and she could thank them, but given their treatment of her, he advised against it. The comment made Trevor's face go even redder, and I thought for a moment he might actually try to hit Keith. But Harold stepped forward and reminded everyone that we were here to discuss next steps, not to rehash who had paid for what. Brenda pulled Dad aside, whispered frantically in his ear for several minutes while shooting glances at me. I could not hear what she was saying, but I could see her gesturing emphatically, could see Dad nodding along with whatever poison she was pouring into his ear. Then she turned back to me, and her entire demeanor had changed. Her voice went soft, and her eyes filled with tears that looked practiced, rehearsed. She said that maybe she had not given me a fair chance, that she realized now they might have been too hard on me over the years. She said she wanted to start over. That family was important, that maybe I could move in and we could all live together harmoniously. I told her not to bother, that I could see exactly what she was doing. Iris jumped in and pointed out that now they were willing to invite me to live here, now that they knew I owned the property and could evict them. Brenda ignored Iris and turned to Dad, urged him to tell me they wanted me there, that we could be a real family. Dad finally spoke, said he thought maybe he had made mistakes over the years. I waited for him to continue, to be specific, to show me he actually understood what those mistakes were. He said maybe he had not been there enough, his voice uncertain, like he was testing out words to see which ones would work. I asked him to be specific, to tell me exactly what he was sorry for. He struggled, looked at Brenda for guidance, looked at Harold as if the attorney might have the answer written in his documents. Finally, he said he was sorry for making me feel less important than Trevor. I pushed further, asked him what else. He said he was sorry for throwing my gifts in the snow. I asked again, what else? He floundered, said he did not know what else I wanted him to say, and I realized he genuinely did not understand the full scope of what he had done. He thought a few apologies would fix 20 years of neglect. I told him he was not sorry for how he had treated me. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry he had just discovered he had been living in my house rent-free for almost 5 years. He tried to protest, said that was not fair, but I cut him off. I listed out specific incidents, my voice gaining strength with each one. I reminded him of my spelling bee that he missed for Trevor's soccer practice, and he had been living in my house when I won that trophy. I reminded him of the $3,000 he gave Trevor for a Europe trip while I worked 2 jobs, money he had available because he was not paying rent on my property. I reminded him of the birthday party for Brenda's sister on my birthday, a party held in my house while I ate takeout alone. Each statement landed like a physical blow, and I watched Dad physically shrink in his chair. Trevor could not stay quiet any longer. He accused me of being jealous, said this was all about money, said I was bitter because I was not as successful as he was. I turned to face him directly and told him I did not want Dad's money. I wanted his love. I wanted one Christmas where I mattered more than a party guest list, one birthday where I was not forgotten, one family dinner where I was not the afterthought seated at a folding chair with a mismatched plate. I wanted to be chosen, just once, for no reason other than I was his daughter, and that should have been enough. Brenda tried yet another tactic, dissolving into dramatic sobs that echoed through the living room. She wailed that this was so cruel, that they had nowhere to go, that it was Christmas Day. I reminded her that she had 30 days to find somewhere, which was more notice than she had given me when she deleted my Facebook comment asking if I could come to the party. She insisted that had been a misunderstanding, her tears drying up remarkably quickly. I told her it was not a misunderstanding, it was a choice, just like Dad throwing my gifts in the snow had been a choice, just like every missed birthday and forgotten achievement had been a choice. Brenda turned to Dad, her voice going shrill again, demanding that he do something, that he not let me do this to them. Dad asked me to please reconsider, said we should talk about this calmly. Iris spoke up, her voice icy, and said I had been trying to talk for 4 years but nobody had been listening. Harold added that Constance had hoped Dad would prove her fears wrong, that he would value his daughter without knowing what she owned, but he had proven exactly what Constance had feared. He had shown that his love was conditional, that it required Mallory to be convenient, undemanding, willing to accept scraps while others got the feast. Keith laid out the 3 options clearly. Dad could accept the 30-day eviction notice and leave peacefully. He could try to fight it legally and lose while accumulating attorney fees he could not afford. Or he could negotiate an arrangement where he acknowledged what he had done and made genuine amends. The choice was his. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Constance's old clock on the mantel, the one that Brenda had wanted to replace but I had refused to approve. Dad sat in the recliner for what felt like an eternity, staring at the deed in his hands, occasionally glancing up at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. Finally, he asked what I wanted from him. I told him again, more slowly this time, that I wanted him to be my father, not just in name but in action. I wanted him to care about my life, to show up for me the way he showed up for Trevor, to treat me like I was worth his time and attention. He asked, and I could not believe he was still focused on this, whether I would charge rent if they stayed. My heart cracked open all over again. Even now, even after everything, his concern was financial rather than relational. I asked him if that was really his priority, if his first thought was about money rather than about repairing the damage he had done to his own daughter. He said he was trying to be practical, that we needed to figure out the details. I told him I was trying to matter, that I needed him to see me as a person rather than a problem to be solved. The gap between what I needed and what he was capable of giving felt impossibly wide in that moment, a chasm that could not be crossed by legal documents or family connections or even love, because the love I needed him to feel simply was not there. He did not have it to give me, and maybe he never had. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every year, every disappointment, every moment of being invisible settle on my shoulders. Then I lifted my chin and made my decision. I told Dad he had 60 days instead of 30, that this was my final gift to him. He looked confused, asked 60 days for what, as if he still did not understand that this was ending. I told him clearly, 60 days to find somewhere else to live, because I was done being invisible, done begging for crumbs from his table, done hoping he would wake up one day and realize I was worth loving. Brenda immediately protested, said I could not do that to them, that they had rights. I reminded her that actually, this was my house, my property, my decision. The deed in Dad's hands proved it. The will Harold had brought proved it. 4 years of trust documents proved it. Every renovation they had done, every change they had made, had been with my approval given through attorneys they never knew were consulting me. I had been generous beyond measure, and they had responded by throwing my gifts in the snow and telling me never to come back to my own home. Trevor surged to his feet, yelling that this was complete nonsense, that Dad had worked hard his whole life and did not deserve this. I asked Trevor if he thought I had not worked hard, if he thought my 2 jobs and student loans and beat-up car were evidence that I was lazy. I asked him if he thought I did not deserve a father who showed up to my achievements the way Dad showed up to his soccer games and debate tournaments. Trevor said I was just bitter because I was not successful like him, and I could not help but laugh at the irony. I told him I was successful enough to own a house at 28 years old, asked him how his rented apartment was working out for him. He lunged forward and Keith immediately stepped between us, making it abundantly clear that any physical contact would result in police involvement and criminal charges. An unexpected voice came from the hallway, saying that I was right, and they all knew it. Everyone turned to see Dad's brother Gordon standing there, apparently having let himself in through the back door for his planned Christmas visit. Gordon said he had been watching this family dynamic for years, had seen how I got the short end of every stick, every decision, every scrap of attention. Dad told him to stay out of it, but Gordon refused. He said he should have spoken up years ago, that Constance was right to protect me the way she did. Then he looked at me and told me something I had not known. Constance had called him before she died, told him what she was planning with the house and the trust, made him promise to watch over me and intervene if things got too bad. I asked Gordon if he had known all along, and he nodded. He said Constance had shared her plan with him, had asked him to be a witness to how Dad treated me, to be ready to support me if I needed it. He said he had been waiting to see if Dad would figure it out on his own, would realize what he was doing to his daughter and change course. He said Dad never did, never even got close, just kept choosing everyone else over me year after year while living in my house and spending my generosity without ever acknowledging my existence. Dad stood up from the recliner, the deed still clutched in his hand, and for the first time really looked at me. His voice was quiet when he said I looked like my mother. I told him I knew that, had known it my whole life. He said that after Mom died, looking at me hurt too much. Reminded him of everything he had lost, so he stopped looking. The admission hung in the air between us, and I felt tears starting to form. He said it was not an excuse, just the truth. He said he had failed me because he was too broken by losing my mother to see that he was breaking me in the process. For the first time since I arrived, I heard something real in his voice, something that sounded like actual understanding rather than calculation. I asked him if he truly comprehended what he had done, and he nodded slowly. He said he had made me feel like I did not matter, and I confirmed that yes, for 20 years I had felt exactly that way. He said he did not know if he could fix it, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. I told him I did not know if he could fix it either, that I was not even sure I wanted him to try anymore because the wound was too deep and had been left untreated for too long. But then I offered him something I did not have to offer. I told him he had 60 days to find a place, and I would help with the deposit, no strings attached. He asked why I would do that after everything, and I told him the truth. Grandma Constance had taught me that my worth was not determined by how others treated me but by how I treated others. She had taught me to be kind even when kindness was not returned, to be generous even when generosity was not appreciated, to be strong enough to help people even when they did not deserve it. That was the lesson she had tried to teach me with this house, with the waiting period, with the whole elaborate test. My value existed independent of their recognition, and I could afford to be kind because I was standing on the foundation she had built for me. Brenda grabbed her purse from the couch, her face twisted with rage. She said she would not be part of this manipulation, that this whole situation was insane. She turned to Dad and told him to choose, told him it was either me or her. The ultimatum hung in the air, and I waited to see what Dad would do. He looked at Brenda, then looked at me, and the silence stretched out for what felt like forever. Finally, he said he thought he needed to choose himself first, that he needed to figure out how to be a better father before he could be a good husband. Brenda's face went purple with fury. She called for Trevor, said they were leaving immediately, and Trevor looked at Dad as if waiting for him to change his mind. Dad told Trevor to go with his mother, that he needed to talk to me alone. After Brenda and Trevor stormed out, slamming the door behind them with enough force to rattle the windows, the house felt strangely quiet. Just Dad, me, and my 3 supporters stood in the living room surrounded by torn wrapping paper and cold coffee. Dad said he did not expect me to forgive him, and I told him that was good because I was not ready to forgive, might never be ready, and he needed to understand that. He said he wanted to try, really try this time, not because I owned the house, but because I was his daughter, and he had wasted too many years not appreciating that. I told him I needed to see actions rather than hear words, that I had heard apologies before and they never translated into changed behavior. He asked how he could show me, and I gave him concrete steps. Start by asking about my life, my job, my dreams, the things he never bothered to learn about me. Show up when I needed him, rather than only when it was convenient. Treat me with the same consideration he gave to Trevor, to Brenda's family, to party guests, and casual acquaintances. Stop expecting me to prove I was worth his time and instead recognize that being his daughter should have been enough qualification all along. 6 months passed after that Christmas Day confrontation. Dad moved into a modest 1-bedroom apartment across town. His first time paying full rent in years, without Brenda's influence constantly in his ear. Something shifted. We started meeting for coffee once a week, awkward at first, both of us unsure how to talk to each other without the buffer of other people or the weight of unspoken resentment. The first meeting, he actually asked about my work, my retail management position, that he had dismissed so easily at Thanksgiving. He listened when I talked about the challenges and small victories, and he did not compare me to Trevor once. The second meeting, he brought a photo album I had never seen before, filled with pictures of my mother from before I was born. We sat in a coffee shop looking through images of her young and laughing, and he told me stories I had never heard. He said I had her smile, Her way of tilting my head when I was thinking hard about something. Her stubborn determination to find the good in people, even when they did not deserve it. For the first time, talking about Mom did not seem to cause him pain, and sharing her with me felt like a gift he was finally ready to give. The third meeting, he apologized for specific things without me having to prompt him. He listed them out. The spelling bee and my birthday and Thanksgiving and Christmas Eve, each incident named and acknowledged. He did not make excuses, did not try to minimize the hurt. He just said he was sorry, that he had been wrong, that he wished he could go back and do it all differently. I told him we could not go back, could only move forward, and only if he proved the changes were real and lasting. By the fourth meeting, he asked if I would be willing to teach him about property management. I had started taking classes at the community college, working toward a career change that would let me leverage my unexpected asset into a sustainable profession. He seemed genuinely interested in what I was learning, asked thoughtful questions, took notes on a pad of paper he brought specifically for that purpose. It was not the relationship I had dreamed of as a little girl, but it was something real, built on honesty instead of obligation. 8 months after that Christmas confrontation, I sold the house. The memories were too painful. Every room saturated with rejection and hurt I did not want to carry forward. I used the profit to start a small property management company, just me and one part-time assistant at first, but it was mine. Dad became my first client. Not for the apartment he lived in, but for a small 4-unit building he decided to invest in as part of rebuilding his finances. It gave us something to work on together, a professional relationship that slowly, carefully, began to rebuild personal trust. Trevor never apologized, never reached out, never acknowledged that any of it had been wrong. I made peace with that, recognized that some people will never see past their own entitlement. Brenda sent nasty letters for a few months, accusing me of destroying her family, threatening legal action that never materialized. I read the first one, then stopped opening them. Eventually, they stopped coming. Gordon became the uncle I had always needed, showing up for Sunday dinners, remembering my birthday, treating me like family without needing a legal document to convince him I mattered. Sitting in my new condo 1 year later on Christmas Eve, I hosted a small gathering. Iris and Keith came, bringing their toddler, who had been born that spring. Gordon arrived with his famous apple pie. And Dad came too, tentatively, carrying a small wrapped gift. He had asked if he could join us, had not assumed he was welcome, had waited for an invitation. When I opened the gift, I found my mother's jewelry box, the carved wooden one that had sat on Constance's dresser my entire childhood. I had thought it was lost in the shuffle when Brenda redecorated. Dad told me he had kept it safe, said Constance had wanted me to have it, but he had been too selfish to let it go. He said he should have given it to me years ago along with 100 other things, but he was giving it to me now as a symbol of what he was trying to do. Inside were my mother's wedding ring, a few pieces of costume jewelry I remembered her wearing, and a small photo of the two of us when I was maybe 3 years old, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. Dad's voice broke when he said he was sorry he could not see me before. But he saw me now. He saw the real me. The person who had been there all along. The daughter who had deserved better. I told him I saw him too. The real version underneath the mistakes and the pain, the father who was trying even though it was hard and uncomfortable and required him to face his own failures. It was not a fairy tale ending with everything magically fixed. We were not fully healed, probably never would be completely. But we were honest with each other, and honest was a foundation we could build on. I recorded a voice memo for myself that night after everyone left, wanting to capture what I had learned before the clarity faded. I said that self-worth cannot be given by others, it has to come from within. Grandma Constance gave me more than a house. She gave me the foundation to build my own life, independent of anyone else's approval. Dad is trying now and I am letting him. But I am not waiting for his validation anymore because I do not need it to know I am valuable. I spent years thinking I was not enough, but the truth is I was always enough. They just could not see it. and their inability to see my worth said everything about them and nothing about me. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who hurt you deepest, but that does not mean you stop being kind. It means you get wise about who deserves your kindness and how much of yourself you are willing to give. I own my story now, not because of what I inherited, but because I chose to stop letting others write my worth. The house was just a house, in the end, wood and bricks and memories, both good and terrible. But the lesson Constance taught me, the foundation she built under my feet, that was worth more than any property deed. That Christmas, when my dad threw my gifts into the snow and told me never to come back to his house, he had no idea it was my house all along. But the real gift was not the house or the revenge or even watching him realize what he had lost. The real gift was learning I did not need the house to prove my worth. I already had everything I needed. The strength my grandmother saw in me, the friends who stood beside me, and the courage to demand better. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize you have had yourself all along, and that is the only foundation that truly matters. So here is my question for all of you watching this. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who refuse to see your value? Have you ever owned something that changed a relationship when the truth came out? Drop your stories in the comments because I would love to hear how you handled similar situations. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and let me know you were here. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story about standing up for yourself and finding your worth. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are enough, that they always have been, that their value does not depend on anyone else recognizing it. Thank you for listening to my story, for being here on this journey with me. I hope wherever you are, you know that you matter, you are seen, and you are worthy of love that does not require you to beg for it. Merry Christmas to those celebrating, and may we all find the courage to build our lives on foundations that cannot be shaken by anyone else's inability to see our light.